There are many Christians who don't believe you're going to burn for eternity because you didn't accept Jesus, and it's because of the Bible. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. So this modern idea of hell didn't come into its full form until hundreds of years after Jesus and after the early Christians. And it makes sense that it couldn't form until later. Because if you think about it, the early Christians believed that their God was a loving God, and they were a tiny movement, like really small, thousands to begin with. And of course, it increased in popularity as the centuries drew on. But the important piece is that if they believed that only this really tiny group of people were ever going to go to heaven and that everyone else was going to burn for eternity in eternal conscious punishment, their God wouldn't be a loving God. In fact, the vast majority of people on earth would receive eternal punishment, while just a tiny fraction would receive some eternal reward. So what did they believe? Well, there's a range of beliefs that they had about what happens after you die for people who were not Christians, and mostly for people who were particularly wicked in this life. If you remember, that time the Jewish people were occupied by the Romans, and they were doing horrible things. I mean, the story of Jesus is a perfect example, this practice of crucifixion. And they were persecuting the Jews and the Christians and all of these people. And they were getting more powerful. Their kingdom was expanding. And so the question became, well, why are these people prospering? And why is God not doing something about it? And eventually this idea of like the punishment happening in the afterlife came about. And there were three sort of schools of thought about that. One of them was that the punishment was annihilation. Another of them was that the punishment was like temporary punishment and then they would be done. And then there was the option of eternal conscious punishment, the one that you've heard of, but it wasn't the major player. But amongst the Christians that were a little bit later, not around when Jesus was around, there began to sort of take hold this idea that the choice to follow God, to be part of God's family, extended beyond the grave. Like when you died, you could continue to choose to be part of God's family. And that was really one of the most widely held beliefs for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it squares with the Bible because the Bible doesn't talk much about hell. And in fact, you don't actually see any talk of this eternal afterlife punishment at all. In the Old Testament, the word that is sometimes translated as hell in inaccurate translations is a word called Sheol. Sheol meant the deep, chaos. It was the waters underneath the flat earth. And it was the realm of the dead, which had some sort of neutral to negative experience for absolutely everybody. Like everybody went to Sheol. Everybody descended to Sheol. In the New Testament, there's two words. The first one is a word called Hades, or Hades, if you want to pronounce it some weird way that I heard an author say one time in a book. But in Hades, you may remember it from your high school English class or history class when you studied Greek mythology or Roman mythology. It was the realm of the dead. And again, you have this idea that is suited in the mythology, and that metaphor is being used to say something specific. You actually see a perfect example of this in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, where they both in the afterlife are in the same place. The rich man is in this lower place, and he can see Lazarus, who was this poor guy that he could have helped, but he didn't. And Lazarus is with Abraham in Hades, in the realm of the dead. But they're all in Hades, and the rich man is tortured and is asking Abraham to send the poor man Lazarus with some water to him. This is just like all of these stories about Hades, about these interesting punishments, about the guy that rolls the rock up the hill only to have it roll back down when he finishes. And this is this idea from mythology, and it's not talking about an actual afterlife experience. Jesus is using it to say something bigger. The last word is Gehenna, and it is a specific place. This place called the Hinnom Valley. If you ever go to Israel, you can have a tour guide actually show you this place. And it was a place that later, after Jesus, was used as a trash dump. But it was thought of as this really, really unholy place where the story was that kings of Israel in the past, the evil, wicked kings, actually did child sacrifice there. So when you look for the modern understanding of hell in the Bible, you don't find it. And somebody may point to Revelation about something being thrown into a lake of fire, but again, Revelation is a total metaphor, and it was meant to talk about the Roman government. It was sort of like this revenge fantasy for the people who lived at that time, but that's another video. There's lots more details, a whole chapter in my book that's coming out, pre-release copies available at the link in my profile. And that's why a number of Christians don't believe in this popular version of hell that you have heard on TV and evangelical evangelists. Now, don't get me wrong, you're not going to find people in a conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical tradition that believe anything else, right? But there are so many people who do follow the teachings of Jesus who don't believe that. And that's an important thing for people to know.